Thank you all. Just want to make sure my mic is working. Thank you for having us here today. We're really excited. I'm Komal Khatri. I've been with the company for a little over 12 years now. I'm the director of the UAG Invention Program, so anything to do with patents, which is a way for us to help formalize and bring our innovations to the market. So I do these things, I call it stretch assignments, so here I am. I am a DEI advocate, which is where I lead an initiative called UAG Women Invent. And the primary purpose was to help fill gender disparity gaps in inventions. I am an inventor myself, and I didn't really start my journey till almost 10 years after I'd been in the company. So like I said, I've been here 12 years, but didn't really think about inventing till almost 10 years after, and I want to kind of share my stories with others too and encourage them to come and become an inventor. I'm also on the steering committee of disability and inclusion track over at Optum, just helping drive lived experiences learning sessions. So those are a lot of fun too. We have another session planned out for today, so you'll get to hear more about disability inclusion. So that's all about me. I used to live in Minnesota. I lived here for 20 years, and I moved to Austin about 3 years ago. So it's always nice to come back here and see all the Minnesota nice people. So here we are. I do want to kind of give you guys a quick brief about our event today. Diversity and inclusion drives innovation. And I just want to say a few things. What is the purpose, right? Why are we doing this? So having a diverse and inclusive culture and really team, right? It fosters creativity and idea generation, which really leads to innovation. So today I have a lot of great leaders from different parts of the organization, enterprise, I should say, as well as from different industries. So I'd like to welcome them. I also want to kind of mention that equity is another thing we need to be mindful of. It is about fairness, right? Health equity, equity related to hiring, and career-related equity discussions. So we will have some discussions around equity as well. And this panel discussion is really designed to discuss how you can bring diversity and inclusion into technology and innovation. So at this time, I'd like to welcome our very first guest. Her name is Stephanie Hammes. She is Senior Vice President, Stephanie Hammes-Betti, Senior Vice President with Digital Risk, and she is with the US Bank. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here today. Please take a seat. Next up, we have Patricia Jordan. She is from Optum. She's the Vice President of Optum Insight. She's with Data Analytics and Engineering. Let's welcome Patricia. She's from Austin as well. Next up, we have Jen Alstad. She's the founder and president of a company called B-Swing. B-Swing was once a startup. So if you guys are looking for someone to talk to, and her experiences about how she started and how she's been on the journey, she's the go-to person for you guys. Jen, please take a sit. Thank you. And next up, we have Steph Henry. She is from Optum. She's the senior director with the product capabilities, Optum Financial Services. So Stephanie, welcome. Please take a seat. All right. So we have leaders from various industries who will share the work that they have done and really shed some light on what are some of the challenges they have seen in this world, right? Diversity and inclusion is something that is close to everyone's heart. And I think the idea here was for us to kind of learn from each other and not kind of come up with new ways of solving problems. If we can learn from each other and not come up with new ways, but rather be part of it together. So at this time, I'd like each one of us, our panelists, to tell us a little bit more about the work you guys do. So Stephanie, I'll start with you. Tell us about your current role and what does your day-to-day job look like?
My day-to-day job, I recently moved from an innovation role at US Bank, and I am now in the risk role. And the purpose of that, right, the thing I'm trying to do there is bring some innovation, thinking, and skill set into the risk organization, But I was also really interested in just exploring that as an opportunity. So my team and I, we are second line risk. So we do a lot of oversight on technology risk for US Bank, do some advising, look at policies and reviews. And so a lot of the way that I look at risk is really how I looked at innovation, right? So you're bringing people in, you're helping them understand, you're helping things get moved forward, and you're kind of learning along the way and sharing that learning with the teams that you engage with.
Great, thank you so much. Patricia, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So yes, as you mentioned, I'm with the Data and Analytics Division of Optum. And what we do is we provide the provider space, so medical groups, health system operations, and physicians with tools on how to manage the care. As a lot of you know, if you followed healthcare, we want to move to more evidence-based cares and evidence-based outcomes. And so we're trying to pivot from providing historical content in terms of this is how you did to this is how you need to inflect the care that you have on your patients to prevent them from having to come see you. Right? So in that space, innovation is very important, right? Because we do need to understand what's going on. We need to be thinking ahead and not necessarily looking backwards.
Great, thank you very much and welcome. Jen.
Hi there, I'm Jen Alstad and I'm with a firm called B-Swing, which I founded a long time ago. So when Komal said there's a founder story, I would say it's been over 20 years. But the work that we do is really focused on understanding people and then using that to actually build new products and services. So I think as we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and how you need to actually engage people to make that equitable and fit into their lives, there are big opportunities.
Awesome, and then Stephanie. Steph, we have two Stephanies and we call her Steph.
Hey everyone, Steph Henry from Optum Financial Services. I have served at Optum for 14 years in various roles, primarily on the technology side. And day to day now, I'm serving within Optum Financial Services in the product and capability space. Healthcare has never been more expensive for consumers to figure out and pay for. And so we get the privilege every day of figuring out innovative ways to meet that intersection of paying for care and getting care and making that be something that's much more consumer driven, meets the consumer right where they are.
Awesome, well thank you all for being here today. I know it's Friday, today's the last day, and we're just honored to be here today. So I'd like to start out by asking my first question. Patricia, this one is for you. Tell us, how do you think diversity affects creativity and innovation? And if you have any examples that you can share, I'd love to hear from you.
Yes, so, I'm with Mike on the chair of Shades in Technology, and we recently had a leader in the diversity and inclusion space come, and she's told the story of washing her hands in a bathroom with one of those sensor water things, and the lady next to her kept on trying to get the water to come out, and it wouldn't. And so she asked someone next to her and says, hey, it's not working for me. Can you try it? And the lady next to her was lighter complected than she was. And she had noticed that it didn't necessarily work for her, but it would work for someone else, right? And so that tells the story of why diversity does matter in what we build. We're in the health space. You mentioned equity.
Yep.
We need diverse opinions. We need diverse talent so they can bring their diverse experiences so that what we build serves the population at large and not just a segment of the population. And so that's why on a day-to-day basis, I make sure to be diverse, but also inclusive, right? Because diversity is only the first step, but then we have to make sure that we hear out the other viewpoints so that what we build is more inclusive.
Great, thank you for sharing. Stephanie, yeah, if you have any other...
Yeah, I think to kind of couple with that from maybe the banking side of the house, I think the very first thing I learned in innovation is observation, which you just mentioned. And we were lucky early on, the founder had set up like focus groups, but they're kind of interactive sessions. And you would go in with your idea, you'd be very excited, this is the best idea ever, it's gonna be awesome. And it would implode before your eyes. And very often it was those kinds of things. Like you're very excited as the designer, you've got your perspective in it, and then you realize you've missed all these things. And I think that early on experience, which seems very logical, but it's also very often missed, is going out and reaching out to people and just talking to people. The more people, the better, because your idea, even if it implodes, there are kernels there, or you'll get a new idea. But the more that you can even just go to people, in your network, outside of your network, go to a cafe, go to places where you can engage people around the idea, I think has been really helpful. We have access, right? We're big companies. We have access to a lot of research. We have access to a lot of resources, but sometimes we neglect the small little kernels of insight that actually can drive us to a better solution that's definitely more inclusive. So, when in doubt, there's like the 5-person input kind of rule, and sometimes it's 5 groups, and sometimes it's 5 groups even after that, because you'll start to see themes emerge. You'll get really excited about that, but you want to keep getting in additions and sort of put it in different contexts too, which I think is helpful, because like in the bathroom situation, the designer was thinking this is going to save people from having to touch, but didn't think about the people and sort of the context of use and the different times where like you might have a bag on your back or, other things that sort of impact how you use a solution. And so we really tried to get into that empathy space and the observations that go with it.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, and I'll remember that 5-person rule. Awesome. Well, thank you, Stephanie and Patricia, for sharing your perspectives. So I just want to talk a little bit about inclusive leadership, right? So inclusive leaders are the ones that create inclusive cultures. Research shows that organizations with inclusive cultures have more innovation and higher levels of performance. Team members in inclusive cultures experience a greater sense of belonging, well-being, and psychological safety. That's the reality. So at this time, I'd like to ask all panelists a question, and my question is about what are the steps you are taking to be inclusive and to address diversity and inclusion? And we'll start with Steph.
Well, I think the important thing to think about first is that inclusion starts with diversity. So it's great to focus on fostering a super inclusive environment, but if your table is not diverse and if your product design doesn't include all those different perspectives and taking that kind of time to get perspectives, if you don't have it with you, inclusion doesn't really matter as much as we really want it to. So inclusion starts with diversity, and fostering that environment sometimes day to day means making sure everyone's being heard, making sure everyone's voice at the table is actually coming out. If you notice someone who's quiet in the group, ask them, what do you think, right? If you have that experience of being the only in a room or the only on a team, you know what it feels like when you say something and it's just dead air. Like, I just spoke, right? You heard me. Give voice to someone who experiences that. Like, oh, I just heard you say that. That's a great idea. Tell me a little bit more. But fostering that day to day is very much a leadership competency that all leaders need to work on and be very conscious of.
Great. Thank you for sharing, Steph. Jen?
I think one of the ways that we've been thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion is actually in the way we choose what we work on, and actually making sure that the kinds of projects that we're working on are actually trying to move the world to be more equitable and to be more fair. And so a lot of the work that we have been thinking about are things that provide broad access. And when we do research, a lot of times what that means is you have really interesting opportunities to talk to different people with very different perspectives, which helps teams see themselves in both the community and in the work. And so that's been really important for us.
Great, thank you for sharing. Patricia?
One of the things that we're doing is something that Steph mentioned in terms of getting more diverse voices at the table. Mm-hmm. So we've definitely worked on changing the job description so that they are more inclusive, or at the very least not excluding as many candidates. We've been exploring changing our pipelines. Where do we get our candidates? Where are we sourcing from? Mm-hmm. Expanding on that. And also just even having different people interview, right? Because you tend to lean towards the people that are like you, that are like-minded, right?
Yeah.
If I have different people that don't necessarily agree with me, don't necessarily have my viewpoint, interview candidates, then I will get at least different candidates coming, right? So we're really trying to inflect the workforce and make sure that they're more diverse so that we get that more of that diversity in the room. And then to Steph's point, that inclusivity as well.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. Stephanie?
You know, I think for me, kind of a part of what all of these great ladies have said is being intentional. In large corporations, we speak in PowerPoint, and so every meeting, I swear, has a very intentional PowerPoint where people have obsessed about the words and the diagrams and all that kind of stuff. But very often they forgot or they just don't think about being intentional about who's at the meeting and how to include people at that meeting. You know, have you invited all the right people? Are there some ways to maybe mix it up, to your point, to get countering points of view so it isn't just a full agreement kind of meeting? And I think that when you are intentional and you know that you've set that stage because you want that inclusion to happen and you want the diverse voices to be heard and respected, I think then it comes. But I believe it doesn't come naturally. And so we have to start to really be intentional about it and set up, you know, whether it's a meeting or a one-on-one, whatever it is, just be intentional about that being core of your topic. And I know PowerPoints are very important and how they look, but we also have to think about the humans that we're delivering that message to or that we're engaging in that topic. And so being intentional to make it work and get the outcomes you want.
Great, thank you for sharing. Appreciate that. So it's so marvelous to hear, right, some of the great work that you guys have done and just being intentional and just being inclusive, thinking about diversity, right? At this time, I'd like to ask you guys, maybe we'll start with Patricia first, about what have you learned through your life experiences that has helped you become a better advocate for diversity and inclusion?
So I think the very first experience that I had in terms of I need to be an advocate for someone and an ally came in my personal life. There was a young lady that was in my family who parents were going through their own parent things and were not thinking of the child, right? So I knew that I had to be an agent for her and speak for her. The second situation came when I moved to the Austin office. Coming from DC, very diverse workforce, very diverse office. Austin was less so, right? Then it was very strikingly so. And so that's when the first iteration of Shades started in terms of just really making sure, like, we have a diverse population within Austin. How do we bring them in? Right. And then even the people that are in the Austin office, how do they find opportunities outside of their space? Because the little color that there was, or the little diversity, was in the services areas. And they had aspirations to go technology, to go product management, et cetera. So how do we give them the pathways to get to that point so that they have the skills and even the confidence, right, to get to those levels? So those two areas are really what prompted me to make sure that they don't experience what some of us were discussing in the back in terms of when you walk into the room, you're the only woman in the room or you're the only person of color in the room, and making sure that we do have that cohesive, comprehensive workforce that can solve more complex problems.
Great, thank you for sharing. So let's maybe talk about some of the challenges that you guys have faced. So Stephanie, this is a tough question, so this is for you. What do you think the challenges are with having diversity and innovation work together? And how do you think we create that environment where diverse voices can be heard?
Yeah, that is hard. Thanks. Because you know, it's kind of a ongoing million-dollar question, right? And I think, again, going back to intention, right? You have to be intentional about it, and then very often you have to be that advocate, right? You have to sort of manage the expectations of a timeline in some cases, and why this is important, that we take these extra steps to go out to, you know, more research or to get more voices to weigh in. You know, sometimes you have to sort of explain why that is. And sometimes you also have to just be the one who opens the door and sets the stage. So by inviting people in and sort of showing them, like, when we do this, this is what's going to happen and you get to see this. So whether that's, you know, them participating in an interview that you're doing or an interview with a small group, by having them watch people on video, observe things with you. Sometimes you just have to show people the way. to be inclusive when there's resistance, but I also think that it's always the scene is the telling, right? Showing people what it is and showing people how others are interacting really becomes the story, and it really helps people change mind, because sometimes until you really see it or you experience something, you sort of have like, let's just get it done kind of bias, instead of sort of taking the extra steps to do it right. And so I think you always just have to be an advocate in your culture, and sometimes you start very small. You just start in a very small team and you bring them into it, and you all agree this is how you're going to work together, and you open the doors for each other and you support each other in meetings. And then in other cases, you know, you probably have to go into a bigger, larger forum and make the space available, and sort of the, I guess, the story on why you do it and what the benefits will be back.
And sometimes you almost have to put that extra effort in, like,
Absolutely.
right? We're planning some patent mining sessions in a couple weeks, and we're literally looking at who's signed up and just wanting to make sure the groups that we're forming are diverse, right? They're from different parts of the organization. It's not just always about gender, right? You also want to look at other perspectives, other ways to make the groups diverse. So we really put that extra effort into.
Well, I think to that point, you have to make sure, too, that it's inviting. If you want people from diverse groups, or if you want people to feel safe, sometimes you have to invite differently and show up differently for them to feel comfortable to come to as well, right?
It's very true. Yes, yes. Steph, you know, we heard Stephanie kind of talk about some of the challenges from, you know, from a financial perspective. How about from a healthcare perspective?
Well, I think the challenges are the same. It's the transformational leadership. It's a problem of overall all humanity, right? Like, we all need to sort of be bold within ourselves to be continuous learners. We are the product of the system with which we grew up, and that's what we know. And if we're not willing to step outside of that and learn from someone else's experience, it can quickly become this numbers problem, right? Like, our applicants are low, or whatever it might be. And if it was a numbers problem, we're all great at numbers, we would have solved that a long time ago. It isn't about numbers, right? And, you know, as advocates for DEI in our day-to-day workplaces, in our homes, in our communities, it's constantly driving that self-awareness. Where do you sit? How can I meet you where you are? It can be exhausting at times, right? But that's what the work is. That's the transformation of the work, and it's super important to do. And getting everyone wanting to become more self-aware, I think, is kind of one of the first steps. And then, of course, all the things you guys talked about too. So,
great. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for sharing. So let's switch gears. Now I want to kind of talk about unconscious bias. Right, so this is a very important topic, and I actually have a personal story to share. This was about 5 years ago. I was on a planning committee for a group called Database Challenge, and I remember recruiting executives. So we had panel judges and we had senior executives, right? Where we'll bring them in. Our panel judges would basically, you know, judge the top 50 or 100, how many of our teams we have, and then top 3 are the ones that get judged by our senior executives. So as I was talking to senior execs, I reached out to them. I formed a team of 7 or 8 judges, right? And I'm like, great, we're going to have a champion soon. It was an hour-long meeting. So I was in the room. I remember this is in the 97 healthcare lane when I used to work here, the 10th floor boardroom. I clicked a picture. I'm like, wow, that went great. So I sent that over to a team member, and I said, hey, if you don't mind loading this on our SharePoint, so, you know, we have just a repository of, you know, how everything went and just the happy faces. And she called me. She's like, hey, I want you to look at that picture. Do you see something different about the picture? I'm like, no, it looks great. You know, I have all these senior execs from different parts of the organization with people of color in it. She's like, yeah, but look at it from a D&I perspective. Keep thinking. And I kind of looked at the picture and I realized they were all guys. So it was my own unconscious bias where I'd only talked to men, leaders. And she pointed that out to me, and that's when I realized I have to be more conscious, right, of whom I'm talking to. And I think, Stephanie, you touched on that point too. So from then on, I'd made sure, right, I'm being very mindful of whom I'm inviting, and you know, the future events, we just made sure we had a nice, big, diverse group in there. So that's just something I wanted to share with you guys. It is a story that has really touched my heart. And there are two takeaways I want you guys to take along with you. One is, if you see something isn't right, speak up, because I'm thankful to that person who brought this to my attention. Otherwise, I wouldn't even have noticed. And the second takeaway is, do something about it. If someone points it out to you, or if you notice something could be done in a different way or fashion, continue to be mindful and improve and get better at it. So that was the story I wanted to share. So at this time, I think I'd like to ask Jen about some of the common misconceptions about unconscious bias.
So Komal, I love your story because I think that's happened to all of us in a variety of different ways and places. And the whole point of unconscious bias is we don't know we have it. And so I think one of the things that's really interesting is sometimes the antidote to unconscious bias is actually curiosity. It's like, I'm really curious about why that isn't working for people, or I'm really curious, I need to get in deeper to understand. And I wanted to share a little bit of a story with you. We had been working on a banking product for un- and underbanked people. And we did a lot of deep interviews, so we listened really carefully to folks talk about their experience with banks. And I had so many assumptions about why you wouldn't use a bank. And it was really interesting because at the end of the day, what we decided to do was stop designing on our own and actually hire some of the people we had interviewed to actually be co-designers with us. And it changed the way we thought about the product, because what ended up happening was we didn't make judgments anymore about, you're paying a lot for a payday check casher, and instead we could see that as, it's predictable. It's completely predictable. You can know what the cost is. It works the same way every time. You don't put your money into a bank account, no offense to the bankers, and then some of it magically disappears when you overdraft. And so for me, that was a great example of how to get past unconscious bias, because we didn't even know what assumptions we were carrying around from the fact that banking worked for us.
Thank you for sharing. Steph, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, that's a great story. I'm kind of drawing on some of my experience over the years. When you step into this kind of role as a DEI advocate or champion, you're really committed day to day to make time and to have conversations and develop relationships where you can drive this transformation. And at times there are feedback sessions about leaders and talent and everything else. And there was a time where someone who I had a really great experience with, my colleague didn't have a very good experience with. And in that session, similar to some of the feedback you got on your Data Viz Challenge judging panel, right? Yep. I just asked a really simple question and just said, is there any chance that her being a woman has affected a little bit of the way you've assessed her development, her voice, how she's feeling heard? And he sat back and said, gosh, I need to think about that. And we kind of gave each other that space to ask the question, to be curious, right? And then to sort of give time and honor that, let's reflect on this for a minute and come back. That curiosity is so important, because unconscious bias is unconscious, right? The conscious bias is the stuff we can hopefully figure out. Yeah. The unconscious stuff is like, it happens, it's at the surface, you just can't always see it, and it takes all of us, to be willing to take the feedback, to reflect on it, to think about how that part is actually showing up day to day. And I think those are those little important steps that we need to take across our teams and across our communities as we try to slowly get this transformation to happen.
Great, thank you for sharing. And I just love, Jen, how you said that the biggest misconception is that we don't have it. Yes, we all have, biases. So, and thank you, Steph, for sharing that story too, and for making the other individual realize. And I think just having that discussion, to your point, just opens doors to a lot of other great discussions and feedback. So I want to kind of talk about the different trainings that various companies have in place. So I know at Optum, for example, I lead UAG Women in Ment, where I'm trying to get women to be part of circles, encouraging them to, come in Ment. And I remember there was a video that was recorded for internal purposes, and one of the individuals reached out to me and said, "Hey, I was inspired by your video because you said you had set a goal to, submit one disclosure." And she did the same thing. And I felt so good. I'm like, it was worthwhile for this video to be recorded, right? That if I can impact a life. And that way, I feel like a lot of the various programs that we have in place, in our organizations, they are impacting lives. So at this time, I'd like to talk about Shades in Technology. So Patricia, you are the co-founder of this. Tell us a little bit more about what the purpose is of this program.
So with Shades in Technology, what we really want to do is to impact the lives of people of color, people who identify as people of color in the technology space. Mm-hmm. So first is the in-house talent already. Do they have the skills that they need? Do they have, and by skills, I'm not talking about do they know how to code in Java, right? But it's right. Really, do they have the interpersonal skills? Do they have the soft skills? Do they understand the different roles? Mm-hmm. Do they have the right networks? Right? Because a lot of where you go is who you know, right? So making sure they have the right networks, making sure they have the right skill set, but also how do we impact the community around us? And this is where the work that Mike is doing with Beta comes in, right? We're looking for community partners within the communities that we live in. We're looking for communities in Austin, in Boston, and a lot of other places where we have offices. Because again, this impacts other younger people that want to change careers in technology, mm-hmm. to make sure that they understand that there is a path for them to get into this world, and they will be supported, and they will be understood, and they will be included in all the conversations.
And there was, this summer, I had the honor of, flying to Pittsburgh, and there was the CMU, Carnegie Mellon. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
So I was less involved in that, but we partnered, and I think, again, Mike was instrumental
Mike was
in
there.
that partnership.
Yes.
But we partnered with Carnegie Mellon. I think it was a data science event.
Exactly.
And again, it's to make sure that people of color are aware of the careers within data science and that they understand. And also, selfishly, Optum is a great destination for great students and great talent in data science. So it's a twofold.
And that was part of the Shades of Technology program, mm-hmm. correct? Yeah. And we called it Bridges program. It's really cool. Steph, you lead, thank you, by the way, Patricia, for sharing. Steph, I want to kind of talk about UW-LIT, United Women Leadership in Technology. You're a lead of that program. Tell us a little bit about that program.
UW-LIT, United Women Leading in Technology, is a community for women in kind of STEM professions or STEM interests. Primarily, we have a lot of technologists that are involved, but it's across all of United Health Group. We invite everybody in, and it's not just for women. We also invite men too. Anyone who wants to really be a change maker for women, dig deep and understand how they could become a better leader to foster an environment where, Optum, United Healthcare, UHG are really a place for women in technology leadership to continue to progress and propel. So we founded it several years ago. It was kind of a quiet whisper from a very dear mentor of mine. And she just said, "Don't you think this is needed?" And she also said, "I don't think I'm the right person to push it forward." And I said, "Okay, well, I think we should get a team together to figure this out, right? It's never about one person, right?" So we pulled a cross-collaborative group of leaders. They included men, and we said, "Hey, here's the problem. Let's do something about it. Let's foster the culture we want." And it has just taken off. We do like month-to-month conversations. We have kind of career conversations. I guess it all goes back to reaching everyone that we think would love to be there, always having the door open for more, and having those really important conversations. Then we also feel more empowered and confident to push the status quo. Look at those policies that are crazy, the applicant pool, for example, or the hiring practices. There's just so many things, especially in big companies, that we've always done because we've always done. And when you ask about it, it's like, I don't know, we've always just done it that way. Okay, cool. Let's give it a change. New version, right? So UW-LIT is kind of a fast and growing body of leaders, of people at Optum and UHC that want to see women, even have more opportunity.
Thank you for sharing.
And if I can just piggyback
Yes,
on
please.
that. So that's actually how I met Steph and you, right, for UW Lit. And so what I wanted to stress is there's also a lot of intersectionality between all of the groups, right? These are just two of the many groups that are within Optum. We work with the accessibility team, we work with UNIDOS, we work with the LGBTQ, and it's with all of these different organizations that have, I guess, their lenses on DEI collectively. I think we're making great impacts and we're being those change makers because we are hearing all of those voices.
I love that ad. I mean, it is like such a cross-collaborative effort. Those intersections are important. We get more ideas from each other. We can promote each other's work. It's just fantastic. So whenever we can get our employee resource groups sort of matrix and intersect and push together, I think we get to the finish a little faster.
And I love how you said men are invited, right? Same thing with UHG Women in Men. People reach out to me, is this only for women? No, it's for everyone. In fact, men have a role to play. They can be an advocate, and I encourage them to come form groups. If you're an inventor, bring some new women in on the groups and, invent together. So everyone has a role to play. And United Women Leadership Technology, Shades, we also have Women Lead, we have Women in Analytics and Data Science. I've seen diversity in pretty much all of our women-related groups. So thank you for that. Stephanie, tell us a little bit about, any sort of programs that you guys have in place.
Yeah, so we, like many large companies, have the business resource groups, or what we call BRGs. And we've had those, I think it's, just 7-10 years about. And I think that those are great because they are sort of run by the employees. It's a group that gets together in collective. They represent a lot of different communities, cultures, and they invite anyone, just like you said. But they also really bring topics forward that you normally wouldn't see. Like talking about always doing it the same way. They have, festivals that represent different cultures, or religious events, that kind of thing. And I think that their voice has become very strong within the company, and I love seeing it. We also have a very large concentrated effort within the bank for diversity inclusion, and so we have a program called Journey to Inclusion, something all employees can do, but having those business resource groups be advocates and be sounding boards and places where you can go to be curious and learn, I think really makes that come home, and it makes it something where talk about being intentional, but it makes it a living topic for us. It isn't just something we do, 2 quarters a year. It isn't something that just kind of gets pulled off the shelf for certain conversation. It's something that's present, and you can engage in a lot of different aspects of diversity, which before we didn't really have. And so I think those channels really build that engagement, but more than that, make it a conscious thing within a company to the point to where it just becomes natural, right? And now we have more engagement. In some cases, the groups are growing so big, right? They need to split in 2 in some things, but I think it's fantastic to see that, because in the past, it was just more like a couple of times a year. So having it every day and something you can do unique every day to sort of engage and appreciate and learn, I think is fantastic.
Thank you for sharing. How about you, Jen? Tell us a little bit about, what programs, because you're the founder of B-Swing. How did you decide to kind of loop in some of the, D&I culture and trainings and whatnot?
Well, we're a small company, so we don't have the same sorts of resources. So I think of the work we do is actually learning from community. So a lot of the work we do is actually with startup founders and other places like Hack the Gap, where we're actually learning. We may be contributing a little bit of know-how to certain things, but we are learning as much as we are giving. So I think being embedded in community and continuing to engage has been a really important part of how our organization has done this work.
Thank you for sharing. And again, I think the bottom line is we do not have to reinvent the wheel, right? There are some great toolkits out there that you can leverage. talk to any of us, talk to leaders that are sort of leading programs in place and learn from them and see how you can sort of adapt and include some of the things that we have done. We have all learned from our failures, so we're here to help. Now, the next question is going to be a super tough question, and Stephanie, I'm going to throw this one at you again. That's what happened next to me. I think the last couple years, right, has been tough, 2 or 3 years for many of us, right? There was a study, I was reading an article, this was, I think, in 2019 after COVID hit, and it said 50% of Americans are in depression, right? When we were kind of going through the stage, we didn't know what was happening. What do you think the future workplace look like, right? With all the changes that have kind of come our way, and we've adapted. We've learned how to navigate through the various challenges. But what does the future workplace? And the reason I want to ask you is because from a banking perspective, I know I had some friends that said, well, we're not. Not work from home culture wasn't quite there for most of the banks, but I could be wrong.
Nope, that's right. No, I think it was kind of, the standard 8 to 5, extending from the brick and mortar of a bank, right? And your branch is open, then you're there to support that, even from a corporate standpoint. I think that, boy, we were kind of talking about it earlier this morning. COVID taught us a lot, and things that we do really, really bad and things that we could do turn on. COVID and working from home was definitely not equal experience for everyone. Whether you were a branch employee and sort of had to be there, or if you were part of our call center and we switched you to being home, you had to learn a whole new setup. And then people who were corporate who probably had a little bit more flexibility in the past, everyone goes in. Well, you realize not everyone's home situation is the same. Not everyone has access to internet. Not everyone has an extra monitor to make it easy for them to see. There was just so many disparities that you start to really realize, again, the biases you have and the assumptions you make. Like, well, everyone has an extra office at home, right? And no, and also like family situations, right? So putting all that together moving forward, it's hard because now we have shifted. The branches are open now. We're running, at a fairly normal rate. So I think that's there. But the rest of the culture, it's really finding who we are again, because we kind of disperse. And the one thing that banks had was this culture, because we were pretty much always in the office and expected to be. There was that corporate culture that existed because you were in the space. You were part of the hallway conversations, the drive-bys at your desk, those things that in some cases were somewhat annoying but no longer exist. And those things engaged people. They got things done. And yeah, you can ping somebody via instant message or text them or whatever, but it really isn't the same, because when you're in a room with people, you respond to them differently than when you're on the screen, even if you can see them, and even if you can see their dog and their kids running around. It still is a different human experience to be in person. So I think where corporations need to go is, one, accepting, right, that not everyone's background and home work situation is going to be the same. And so, like, how do we make work situations better? Because we've learned that things are different. So do we need to have different work setups? Like some people like standing desks or hotel cubes, or, we've got these great rooms here that you can just go in and collab and just spontaneously talk and draw on a whiteboard or something. We have to make it so that it feels like you're going to this place for some sort of intended experience with some sort of intended outcome that's worth it to you. Because now everyone's adapted at home and you can do all these things, which is great, but maybe we never recognized as corporations that people were always doing those anyway. We just stressed the hell out of them to try to get to work by 8 o'clock, or ask permission to leave early to take a kid to a soccer. So we can go with this idea of flex time and more flexibility, but also making our workspaces more accommodating and more interactive with each other. I think that that's really what people are going to be looking like from the future. We had interns this summer, and all the interns were really excited to have a corporate experience and come in. There were days where I would just go through the building and collect interns because nobody was there. Nobody was there but the 4 interns and myself and a few other people. And you realize that we've really shifted, whereas before that was an experience. You went in and you learned how to sit in meetings and take notes and do the PowerPoints. And so I think that we have to really think differently about what work means and how we are and what we want people to do when they're at work and what are different work experiences. And I see that happening with a lot of companies defining, how their teams are going to be set up and how offices will be set up. So I think we're getting there, but it's a slow move because we've invested in the other format. You've got cubes, you got big buildings,
Yep.
tan stuff everywhere. Like, it's just, we've got to start to think differently. So it's not going to shift overnight, but slowly we'll get there.
Call it work-life balance. It has shifted, right?
Absolutely. There is no balance, right? We're always in our life.
We're always working.
Sometimes it's work, sometimes it's with whatever else is going on. So.
Thank you for sharing that. I have one last question for Steph, and then we'll close. So, Steph, can you explain the difference between diversity and inclusion?
Well, it all starts with diversity, right? And super important. There is some diversity we can see, and there's some diversity that we can't see. So we have to be super open to how each of us identify as individuals to be able to express what diversity means. And I think really understanding that is incredibly important. Inclusion is making sure that our diverse teams, that's where it starts, right? That everyone's at the table, feeling heard, feeling welcomed, that there's not that awkward silence after something is said, right? But we're giving voice to each other where we're in cultures that's not still happening. And then most importantly for me, I'm just super passionate about equity. Equity is the bridge that gets us to inclusion. And so we can talk about diversity, right, all day at our companies. We can talk about the importance of inclusion, absolutely, but we have to invest in equity, right? We all have different starting points. We all have a ton of value to add. Let's invest in equity to get us to inclusion. And I think that is the piece that we don't still quite talk about enough, but we're getting better.
Thank you for sharing. And there's a quote that I want to share that I absolutely love. And it kind of, as soon as I saw it, I was like, now I get it, right? So diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance at the party. So now it's time for us to wrap up. At this time, I would like to ask all our panelists to, to share some advice, right? If you were to offer to others in finding their voice and advocating for DEI in workplace. So, Steph?
I would say be willing to be vulnerable and be a learner. You only know what you know, so go get educated, figure out what you don't know, ask for perspectives, and be sensitive to the perspectives you're asking for. We should all be vulnerable, but at the same time, we should also honor that our stories, that we have to be careful about sharing our stories. Like every story out there deserves to be heard by the right people. So make sure that you're really finding your circle of trust. And then most importantly, go stand up for someone. If you see something that's not quite feeling right, just give voice to it, stand up for it. It's a small step, but it's in the right direction.
Thank you, Steph. Jen?
I would say, just to piggyback on that, get curious and think about how you can take that curiosity into lots of different areas. I think one of the things that is a question I ask myself a lot is, what's the story I'm telling about this context or who's in the room or what's happening that's wrong? And that makes me sort of reframe how I think about what I might be assuming, what that unconscious bias is, and just get to the place where I can be really open and listening.
Thank you. Patricia?
Kind of basically the same things that Steph and Jen said, but also just being aware, again, of your unconscious biases, that even though I am a woman of color, does not mean I understand every single woman of color and that I can speak for every single one of them, right? So that's where the unconscious bias comes in, is really understanding what am I trying to impact, what impact am I trying to have? What is this person that's sitting in front of me? What is their specific challenge? Don't assume that I know what the problem is and start to solution, right? Just really be open to hearing, open to understand. I think we call it listen to understand at United, but really just understanding who the target audience is and what they need versus what I feel like they need,
yeah.
if that makes any sense.
Thank you for sharing. Stephanie.
You know, I'm going to steal from my friend Jen, who brought up a really good point earlier, which is community. And depending the size of your organization, small company, team of 2, or you're all the way up to the size of our companies, community, whether it's an internal community or external, you should always be reaching out because, you know, you can learn no matter what. So you can do a volunteer day as a team. You can go out and just do interviews. You can reach out to different nonprofits and just go learn from them on who they serve, how they serve, what are the challenges, because you'll learn something. You know, sometimes I feel like, you know, we should just start from wrong and work to right, because so many of our assumptions are really wrong until we learn about them. And those are some good ways just to keep yourself informed. Communities, we forget because we get so nestled into our own units of work. But the broader world is who we're trying to be a part of, and those communities, I think, are really important to us.
Great. You guys have done an awesome job. Thank you all so much for being here today, and I'd like to close at this time. We do have a time for maybe one question. Any? Yes. Maybe one.
I was one of the people who put diversity, inclusion, and equity into various laws. So what happened is that it first hit the government agencies, you know, at the different levels, state, city, county, and so forth. And then the upper level leadership brought in the businesses to try and make it happen in all the major businesses, and then it started as a trickle down. So ERGs evolved from that, and a lot of these other things, and the trainings and what have you. One of the things that I saw was Target, Best Buy, Ameriprise, and Wells Fargo. The different diversity inclusion teams came together jointly and created something with the community. Now, how has your businesses done similar things to connect with other companies and make it broader so we're all talking on the same page to move everything forward?
It's a great question. I mean, I think it all goes back to cross collaboration, right, within our organizations, and then getting outside our walls and understanding what our partner organizations are doing. In the Twin Cities, there's such great progress being made, so that's great. For UW Lit, United Women Leading in Technology, we actually started with some of those same companies that you referenced and asked how they did it. They were farther along on their journey. They were different industries, so we were able to say, okay, what's transferable from retail, for example, that might make a difference or a big impact in healthcare technology. And so those are things that we kind of continuously do as we go forward, and then we try to get events together where we're all partnering and we're all kind of, you know, learning from each other.
Great. I think we're out of time, so thank you all so much for being here today. It's a pleasure being here, and thank you to Beta and Twin Cities Startup.
Thank you.
You.